Hello and welcome to the Timeform King George preview. Myself, Ben Fearnley, joined by Rory King, and we're going to look at the King George primarily, obviously, which is shaping up to be a cracking race on Boxing Day. We'll also look at a few of the other big races as well over the Christmas period and give a few bets for you and hopefully find a winner or two as well. So starting with the King George, and it's the place to start really would be, I guess, with Santini, who is a sort of a surprise runner in this, Rory. We didn't really, I certainly didn't expect to see him showing up in this a couple of weeks ago. I thought it might actually be, a 5-runner field again, to be honest, like we had last year. But in the end, it's actually, despite the fact that the Irish runners couldn't come over, it's shaping up to be a pretty good renewal, to be honest, and some depth in there, as well as the obvious good horses that we've got at the top of the betting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right in what you say, and that it was looking for a few weeks like it was going to be more a match between the 1-2 from last year again, the two Nichols horses. And like you say, not only is Santini joined the mix, and I think he does add quite a lot to the race. He was only just touched off in the Gold Cup last season after all.
Yeah.
Even if the track may not play to his strengths.
Yeah, I thought he actually shaped best in that Gold Cup as well, to be honest. I think on another occasion, we could have been talking about a Gold Cup winner showing up here, whether...
Yeah, quite possibly, yeah. And other than him, the race has stood up as well. There are other horses in there. You weren't sure whether they were going to turn up or not, and they all have, really, haven't they? So...
No, it's a much more interesting race than it threatened to be. But having said all that, I still think that the top two in the market are the ones really that it sort of revolves around for me. I think that Surname, really, I'm surprised that he's not outright favourite. I'm looking at the prices now, and he's sort of eased out to 2-1. I expected him to be 6-4, maybe a little bit bigger, to be honest, even with the added depth with Santini. As we've already touched on, Santini, he's an interesting runner. He adds something to the race, but he's not necessarily going to be suited ideally by the track, is he? He's a proper sort of dour stayer, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you 100% in what you're saying, that for all what we are saying about the depth of the race, I do think that those two are very much the two to focus on, Clandes Obo and Surname, and I do prefer Surname this year as well.
Yeah.
I think in terms of last year, there's been so much spoken about that 3-runner race at Ascot in which Surname beat Altior, hasn't there? And in terms of the market left on Altior, but it clearly left a big mark on Surname as well in my eyes. And not only was he well below par in the King George next time, but he went back to Ascot, and I think it just left the mark for the season, because he was in the process of running well below form at a track which we know he goes so well at. Whereas this year, I think it's basically roles reversed this year, because Surname has had ideal preparation as far as I can see, and that he's had the 8-week gap since winning the Charlie Hall, which Clandes Obo had last year, because last year he went to Ireland, didn't he, for that race at Down Royal, and he had 8-week gap to get him primed for the King George. Whereas this year, Clandes Obo is running the Betfair Chase on really, really bad ground. Must have had a hard race there in putting it up to Bristol de Mai.
Yeah.
It's only a 5-week gap that he's got this year, whereas, like I say, Surname has had the much longer gap. And I know there are still a lot of people who are questioning his stamina for a well-run 3 miles. But to me, the horse that won it, the Charlie Hall, he's, for a horse that is clearly so effective over the stiff 2 mile 5 at Ascot, he just relaxed so well in the Charlie Hall, and he was just completely within his comfort zone the whole way around.
Yeah.
I don't think the form is bad. I know there have been some people questioning the form, but I thought ran really well in the Ladbrokes Trophy.
Yeah.
Vindication was still right there in that race as well when he fell 5 out, wasn't he? So I don't think the form is bad. And like I said, I just think that Surname will be able to get into that. He showed he doesn't have to lead. He was happy sort of taking a lead, sitting close second or third, which I imagine will be the case again. I imagine Frodon will make the running. Maybe Santini will be prominent.
Yeah, there's a bit of pace in there, isn't there? Potentially.
Yeah.
Not quite as much now that Mona Lee's not coming over, but it still should be a well run, hopefully.
I just envisage Surname being able to relax into that really good rhythm again. I think if you watch back last year's King George, I think it's quite clear from early on that he's Harry Cobden was just never really that happy. The horse, I don't think, was taking him forward, and that was at a stage in which they seemed like they wanted to ride him prominently, and I don't think the horse was really taking him there through the first part of the race. You know, I suspect that was just a legacy of the hard race at Ascot, whereas
and I watched that race again actually a couple of days ago, and you can't believe that Surname's been beaten over 20 lengths. If you take a snapshot of 2 hours, they're pretty much outside at that stage. And it's just that last few furlongs where he's completely emptied, and like you say, the effect of that Ascot has just basically been shown in the couple of furlongs. But prior to that, he didn't go with loads of zest, but his jumping was brilliant throughout. He took to the fences really, really well, and I think that's a big thing around Kempton. They come quite thick and fast, and they do go a decent gallop. So he just looks tailor-made for the race. He did going into it last year, and obviously things conspired against him perhaps, and this time around I think he can make amends. And I'd be very much with you on Clanders Oboe as well. I thought the slog that he had against Bristol de Mai in that Haydock mud, that is not ideal coming into this, and it is very much a case, as you said, roles are completely reversed this time around. One of the Nichols horses had a really nice prep and an ideal reappearance going into the King George, and the others possibly had a bit of a hard ordeal. We must mention one or two of the other ones just in behind, because it is a pretty deep race. Lost in Translation, he was a short price in this last year, obviously very disappointing, and to be honest, he's been since winning the Betfair Chase last season, he's been more missed than hit, hasn't he? He's only given his running once really, and although it wouldn't be a surprise to see him win given how much talent he's got, he does have a bit of a cloud hanging over him at the moment for me.
Yeah, like you say, it's since the Betfair, prior to the Betfair Chase last year, he's run 4 times if you include that, and it's 2 very good runs and 2 very bad runs, basically, isn't it? So it's hard to know exactly what to expect. I do think he ran really well in the Gold Cup at a time when many of his horses, as they still seem to be, were running below par.
He tanked through it, didn't he? He travelled really well.
Initially at the time during the Betfair Chase, I was thinking he was really, really disappointing, but I think if you want to look for the positives, you can find some from that race. And it was a slog. Last year he had the run at Carlisle.
Yeah.
He had to come into the race without a prep run. He's a horse that I imagine takes a bit of getting fit. And he was kind of still in touch turning for home before he was quickly left behind, wasn't he? So you can expect, well, if you wanted to be kind to him, or if you wanted to look at the positives, you could see him stepping forward a lot from that fitness-wise. It's just the run, you do wonder slightly whether the track is really going to suit him, given how he ran last year. And that he was never really seemed to be travelling that well in the race.
No, he made a couple of bad mistakes as well, didn't he, last year, which almost uncharacteristic when you watch a lot of his other races. He didn't really take to it, perhaps. I think he for me, I still fancied him coming into this season to run well in this race again, but I was a bit off put by the reappearance, and the yard still can't really seem to get them right. Personally, I think that they're really quiet, and then they have a few winners and you think, here we go, they're all going to suddenly start firing. And that you can look, as you say, you can look at the last even few days and pick positives up about the Tizard yard. They had a winner yesterday at Huntingdon. They've had a number of horses finish second as well, but it's just something in the back of your mind. Some of these big horses that they've had have been a bit underwhelming, and he was one of them on that reappearance. So he it wouldn't be a shock if he won, but still something to prove for Lost in Translation. Any bigger sort of double figure prices that you'd want to mention at all, or is it a case of the top of the market is where we want to be looking really?
Well, I do think there is possibility for a horse to get into the mix because, as we've just said, there are doubts hanging over Lost in Translation to some extent, and there are doubts as to how well suited by the track Santini will be. He didn't look totally suited by the track when he ran in the novice chase there a couple of seasons ago, did he? He kind of lost his before coming home well, and he is clearly a horse that's much better suited to Cheltenham. So there is possibility for a horse to get in there. I wonder whether St Calvados might be the one. I know it's a stiff ask to come into the race on your first run of the season, but he is a horse that does seem to go very well fresh. And I think he's won first time out in every season that he's raced so far. And I'm not certain that he's going to stay the trip, but it's an interesting angle with regards to the trip. He's had a couple of runs over around 2.5, and they've both been really good ones, just touched off from a mark in the high 150s before finishing a very close second, staying on in the Ryanair in a really good time. So there are possibilities about him. The worry about him is that we mentioned the stable form for Lost in Translation. Harry Whittington, I think, prior to yesterday, I think he'd gone 2.5 weeks without even having a runner.
Yeah, they shut down the yard completely, didn't they? And maybe this being St Calvados's reappearance, maybe because they've been so quiet, maybe it's sort of because of that rather than the fact that they might have liked in an ideal situation. You never know. Even considering he's got a good record fresh, this is a massive test, isn't it? And maybe for having a different autumn, the yard might have got a run into him, but that would be the concern with him, definitely. But he wasn't stopping at the end of that Ryanair, was he, behind Min? And,
no, on another day he might even have won.
Absolutely, no. That's definitely one that sort of caught my eye. He's actually been nibbled at. He started out at sort of 20 plus, and he's already sort of coming in a little bit to about 18 to 1 on Oddschecker at the moment. But in summary, I personally, very firmly in the Surname camp. I'm surprised that he's not outright favourite. I think that 21 length defeat by Clanderzobo last year, I think is misrepresentative really of the horse and the race as a whole. And I think if you're just looking at the bare form, that doesn't really sum it up very well. And I think there'll be a lot less distance between them this time around. I'm hoping that Surname can reverse it, having had that different preparation and look so good at Wetherby. I think he could still be a horse that could kick on again and do a little bit better. Just he took off 2 seasons ago. He obviously had a write-off after his reappearance last term, and there's still, for me, a little bit of unfinished business about him, just given the strides that he's been making over the last couple of years. So I'd be firmly in his camp, and to be honest, at 2 to 1, I'd say he's a pretty good bet as well. Given that Clanderzobo's still sort of top of the betting in most places.
Yeah, I'd be with you totally. I know we have very much focused on the negatives so far in terms of Clanderzobo, but obviously there are plenty of positives there. He's a horse that clearly is really well suited by the course and distance and by the way the race is run. And it is a race that does lend itself to multiple winners. He's obviously one of them already. But yeah, having said all that, I'm with you. I just think Surname is the slightly classier horse and has had the better preparation this year, which I think, like you say, I think that's being underestimated in the market. The preparation that the two of them have had. So I'll be with you. And 2 to 1, I agree. I think that's probably could be one of the better bets for Christmas time for me.
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll move on from the King George and have a quick spin through the Corto Star. Obviously, the novice version of the King George, run over the same course and distance. It's run at 150, and it's a pretty interesting race again this year. A couple of the recent renewals, I think, have almost been a little bit underwhelming, and they haven't necessarily produced a really good horse. But this year, I think there's the potential for one of these to end up being very good, one or two of them, really, to be honest. And I guess Chamblou, top of the market at the moment, he has been the one out of all of them that has just looked the most natural over his fences so far, and just taken to it the best for me, having watched a number of them over fences this morning, sort of having a deep look into the race. He is the one that has been almost faultless over his fences, and he's been able to step up significantly on what he did over hurdles because of his jumping mainly, I think. And I think he's sort of rightful favourite, really, to be honest, at the top of the betting. Has he impressed you, Rory? I'm sure he has.
Oh, big time. Yeah, for sure. It's quite an interesting comparison, really, because if you go back to last season's Ballymore at Cheltenham, you know, obviously had the big the three Irish horses who were comfortably on top of the British trained novices in that race. Obviously, Envoy Allen, who's looked really good over fences. Easy Work was second. I think Easy Work actually died recently, didn't he? That's a shame.
Yes, I think he did.
And the Big Getaway was third. And then the next 3 or 4 home were kind of, well, 3 British trained horses who you were expecting to make better chasers. The Big Breakaway. I always get those confused. The Big Breakaway was 4th. Mossy Fen was 5th. Chamblou was 6th. I think Sporting John was 7th. He was disappointing that day, wasn't he? But of those, Mossy Fen has been disappointing over fences, hasn't he? The Big Breakaway was kind of impressive on chasing debut at Cheltenham, and then was turned over at very short odds at Exeter. But Chamblou, I don't think Chamblou has put a foot wrong at all so far in 2 runs at Wetherby. We're winning both by a wide margin. His jumping has been really, really good for me. I know that there've been small field races at Wetherby, but he's been really, really good. Even when he hasn't met a fence on the ideal stride, he's been able to quickly adjust himself. And yeah, I've been really impressed with what he's done so far. He clearly wasn't quite as good a hurdler as the Big Breakaway, but as so often with these skeleton horses, they improve massively for going over fences. And I think he'll take a bit of beating, to be honest. I do think that you can kind of put a line through the Big Breakaway's run at Exeter, because I don't think they could have found a less suitable race for him, really. It was a small field. He had to make his own running. He's a horse that's still, I think, is still pretty raw.
He's very raw and gawky, isn't he?
Yeah.
He doesn't grown up at all in the way he jumps or goes through his races, I don't think.
Yeah. So I think he will be seen to better effect getting a lead back over this bit. But you could argue that maybe the track won't be ideal for him. Maybe he'll be a better horse when he gets back to Cheltenham.
That was the thing that sort of was in my mind watching him again, having a look back through his runs, and he is just huge, isn't he? He's a big baby still.
Yeah.
And you can just see him maybe a really sharp track, even though he's going back up in trip, which will help. I think the really sharp track might not play to his strengths, and a few of his jumps, even at Cheltenham when he did jump well, certainly at certain times in the race, I thought he was still a little bit, well, he was entitled to be a bit novice-y. It was his first start over fences, but he just doesn't look as natural as Chamblou to me over his fences, even though he was a better hurdler, wasn't he? He was ahead of him in that Ballymore, and really of the two going into this season, if you had to nail your colours to one of those 2 British horses being a top chaser, you probably would have said the Big Breakaway, wouldn't you, just given his size and everything. But the point you make about the Dan Skelton yard and their horses just improving immeasurably for fences is a good one, and that's exactly what Chamblou has done. So interesting to see which of those 2 comes out on top, but it's not a 2-horse race. We've also got, obviously, If the Cap Fits and Rillo of the sort of other 2 at single figure prices. Of those 2, which would you prefer, and can you see either of those 2 sort of troubling Chamblou, or is it very much his race to lose for you, Rory?
I wouldn't go as far as saying his race to lose, just going back to Chamblou quickly, I do think that he is going to be very well suited by the demands of this track and this race. He looks really professional, doesn't he? Not only the jumping, but I think there was a moment in both of those runs at Wetherby where Harry Skelton just asked him to quicken, and he does it straight away. And he doesn't, he took lengths out of his opposition in no time at all. And I think that is the sort of horse that is going to be really well suited to this race.
Yeah.
Whereas I see if the cap fits as more in the big breakaway camp, and that I'm not sure that he's an ideal horse for whizzing around Kempton. I think when he won on his chasing debut, he hadn't jumped brilliantly early in the race, and he'd taken a bit of time to warm into it, and he probably outstayed Fiddler on the Roof. And there was a Warren Greattrack's horse in the race who was a bit disappointing as well, wasn't there? But
yeah.
And then he was up against Pim at Sandown, wasn't he? And I'm not sure I don't think these small field races are necessarily his thing, and this is a bit of a bigger field, but I'm not certain that he's necessarily the sort of horse that's going to be seen to best effect here. Whereas I can see Enrillo running well for a long way. He's a horse that I think has taken really nicely to chasing. I know he got turned over at odds on his chasing debut, but I thought he basically did everything right that day up until the sort of final 100 yards, and he got nailed by one. And he kind of made quite hard work of winning at short odds again at Exeter next time. But I think he's a horse that will travel in a better race. And I can see him still being in contention, turning for home. I just wondering slightly whether he's quite good enough at this level. And maybe he'll struggle at the end. But I do think he's quite an interesting horse to keep in mind for the season. Maybe he could be one for a decent handicap in the spring.
Yeah, big sort of 2.5 mile handicap. You can see him sort of bombing through it, can't you? I was with you with if the cap fits. I thought the same. He obviously has the best hurdling form in the race as a Grade 1 winning hurdler, and he's got cheap pieces back on. That he won in those when they first went on. He won a Grade 1 at Aintree first time in cheap pieces. So that's an interesting angle. But his jumping was a bit fiddly early at Foss Lass, and I didn't think it was great in the latter stages when the taps were turned on at Sandown either. It was a bit of a nothing race. They went no gallop, and Pim just quickened away from him, and he is a stayer obviously, but I just would have liked to have seen a bit more fluency from him. And I think the professionalism of Chamblou, that's a good word for him, that is essentially, I think, what will make him, hopefully, I'm hoping, the winner of this race, because that really, in terms of, you just look at how they jump, you take all form in terms of hurdling form out of the equation, you watch all of these front four, and he is the one that really excites you in the way that he jumps his fences. And I think the track is going to be key. Obviously, Wetherby is not a million miles away from Kempton in the way that the makeup of the track, in terms of, no, it's the other way round, but it's quite flat, and it's a good schooling ground if you're going to build a horse up to Kempton, I think. So I'd be keen on him as well, to be honest. I'm hoping the big breakaway can jump a bit better, and I think he can obviously got the talent to win this and win it well, but I think Chamblou really is ultimately the one to beat on what we've seen from this lot over fences so far.
Yeah, I'm with you. It sounds like we're both on the going to be on the short double on boxing.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that's putting me off, isn't it? Those we've tipped both favourites, or probably both likely favourites at the off, but sometimes it goes for you. Right, so now we're going to look at a couple of races in Ireland. We're just going to take a pick, I think, of a couple of races that we like one in. We might as well start with the Savills Chase, which is obviously the big feature race at Leopardstown on Monday. That's the 28th. It's looked a cracking race in prospect for some time, and really it hasn't disappointed in the lineup that we've got, or potential lineup, I should say, at this stage. It's not quite declared yet, obviously, but there's no reason why a number of the big players won't show up at this point. And I believe, Rory, you've got a fancy in this at a price in that Savills Chase.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm probably not. Well, I'm almost certainly definitely not as clued up on Irish racing as you are, but There's a horse in here that I kind of had in mind for stepping up in trip this season after he ran at Cheltenham last season. And that's A Plus Tard, who was obviously a wildly impressive winner of that novice handicap chase a couple of seasons ago. They obviously didn't know what to do with him trip-wise after that, because they tried 3 miles at Punchestown on his following start. And I'm prepared to forgive him that. He was still at that stage. He was still only a 5-year-old. He's now obviously 6 rising 7. He's had time to strengthen. That came on the back of that big effort at Cheltenham, perhaps had taken off the edge off him as well. So I'm prepared to forgive him that run at Punchestown over the trip as a 5-year-old. Since then, they mixed between 2 and 2.5, and he's got very good form at both 2 and 2.5. But I just wonder whether he's going to be a better horse now that he. I mean, like we said, we don't actually have the decks yet, so we're not sure if he's going to run.
Yeah,
I think Henry de Bromhead has said recently that they're looking at stepping him back up to 3 miles. And I think there's a chance that he's got more to come. His jumping was really, really good as a novice. That day when he won at Cheltenham, he was exemplary basically with his jumping. And I thought last season his jumping wasn't quite so good. It was, whereas it had been really bold as a novice, it was more, he kind of reverted to being sort of neat and efficient, or often even sort of putting himself right at a fence to make sure he didn't make a mistake, which doesn't really help, or isn't ideal for the top 2 milers, even 2.5 miles. I think the top horses over 2 and 2.5 generally tend to be really bold attacking jumpers almost. You know, the likes of Min, when he's on song, is a really bold jumper, and horses like that. So I wonder whether his jumping is going to be more suited to running over 3 miles, and that he'll just, as I say, he's tended to be quite efficient, or less extravagant is probably a better way of putting it, and that stepping up in trip will help him to conserve energy. And I think it's interesting that he's potentially being thrown in here against a couple of stable. Obviously, well, there's a good chance that Monley will end up running in here now that he can't come over for the King George. And obviously Connections have the favourite Manella Indo as well. So I think it's interesting that they're talking of letting A Plus Tard take his chance back over the trip. So I think that is quite interesting. Manella Indo is obviously a likeable horse. He represents that strong-looking RSA form from last season, and he hasn't really done anything wrong in winning his 2 starts so far this season. I just wonder whether he's done enough to be a sort of 2-1, 7-4 favourite, and I suspect no is probably the answer.
Yeah, he's. I think everyone saw how well he shaped in the RSA, and really he was mugged, wasn't he, in that race? And he did shape like the best horse for a long, long way. And it's easy to hype up a horse that should have won a big race, as opposed to one that's been there and done it. And I guess with him, he's done very little wrong in his career. I think he's not been out of the first 2 in any of his starts over fences. He's clearly very exciting and completely unexposed, but I mean, he's done very little this season at all. I mean, I reported on that Navan race that he won, and I nearly went to sleep halfway around because they went such a slow gallop, and it really was, you say, glorified schooling session, but that was something else. It was an absolute hack for him. He's achieved very little this season, but obviously he's got that kind of reputation where he's going to scare other horses off, hasn't he now? And we really get a bigger test of his mettle here from the likes of A Plus Tard, presenting Percy as well, hopefully run. It's a cracking race. You often get these every couple of years. You get an absolute storm of this. Obviously, it used to be the Lexus, didn't it? And this looks like one of the better races of recent renewals of the race, I have to say. So that is A Plus Tard, who's Rory's fancy for the Savills Chase. Now, on that same card, we have the Leopardstown Christmas Hurdle, which is run over 3 miles, 3-mile hurdle race. And currently, Sia de Burle is top of the betting for that. And I can see why. He obviously won back-to-back renewals of the Pertemps final. He essentially has been a sort of graded horse who's been running in handicaps for a long time because they wanted to win some big Cheltenham prizes with him, and that's fair enough. But he has lacked application at times. He's worn headgear for quite a while. He had blinkers on first time when he won the Pertemps, which I think definitely benefited him. As a shortish price favourite for this, I just wonder whether that is something just to consider if you're going to back him at sort of 7-4. He might end up trading at a bigger price in running on the Betfair exchange, and he's going to go off because he's that sort of horse who will maybe race behind the bridle a little bit, and maybe the blinkers won't continue to have the same positive effect on him as they have done so far. So I thought he was short enough early on at 7-4. Looking at the betting now, and I really liked Fury Road, his stable companion. I believe they're both going to run here according to Gordon Elliott's comments. And Fury Road, for me, has the best bit of form in the race, which is that third in the Albert Bartlett, which basically has been boosted in every way possible near enough since then, hasn't it? It looked a good renewal at the time, and I think it's really stood up. Everything that's come out has run well, but be that in novice chases or over hurdles. Obviously, Time Hill been doing the form plenty of good in the British hurdle staying races recently. So that's the best bit of form on offer for me, recent form as it goes. And I thought that basically he just got the job done in a non-event really last time at Punchestown. He was short odds. He had to make his own running. He looked like he was going to win by a long way, and then he made a hash of the last and didn't win that impressively in the end. But he's not that kind of horse. He's a bit of a typical horse for this division really, in that he's a strong stayer. He will grind away, and going back up in trip to 3 miles, this will be just his second start at 3 miles in his life. I think he's still got untapped potential, and I didn't see why he should be 7-2 and Sia de Burle was 7-4 really. So I thought he looks a good bet for me, one of my best bets of the Christmas period, and that's in the Leopardstown Christmas Hurdle on Monday the 28th. So I'm hoping that there's a bit of pace in that race. I think it will benefit both of them, but that looks a good race as well. So it's a great time of the year. It's hard to keep up with everything that's going on all over Britain and Ireland during this time, but hopefully we found a winner or two there for you. Just to go back through, I think King George, we're both keen on surname, aren't we? I think, and
yep.
And similarly in the Corto Star Chamblou got the nod really there as the one to beat in that. And A Plutard was Rory's fancy in the Savills Chase, which is on Monday at Leopardstown, Monday the 28th. And for me, Fury Road in the Leopardstown Christmas Hurdle on the same day, the race before the Savills Chase, in fact, on that Monday. So hopefully they can all go well, and I hope you enjoyed watching and listening, and hope you all have a good Christmas and a profitable Christmas as well, hopefully on a few winners on the horses over the next few days. Thanks for watching.